Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Mindfuel, where we are making mental fitness accessible to endurance athletes so you can train your brain as consciously as you train your body. Today, we're joined by Jared Sheridan, a current Triathlon Ireland athlete in Ironman, a former international rower, and the co founder of Sheridan Performance, where he helps engineer high functioning humans both in sport and business. Jared's work focuses on partnering with highly ambitious and successful professionals to set the right goals and help them build resilience and a healthy identity by using endurance events as a KPI, not the goal. Lots to dig into there. So, welcome to Mindfuel, Jared. We start every episode here by asking our guests to introduce themselves, not by telling us what you do, but by explaining who you are. So, Jared, if I asked that a slightly different way, how would a friend describe you?
Oh, I would say someone who's very goal orientated, takes the goal very seriously, but doesn't take themselves too seriously. I'm very competitive in sport, so I've raced for the triathlon with Ireland. I've rowed for GB and England in my day. I've been a competitive powerlifter. I absolutely love sports. I would say the people closest to me would say I'm more interested in like the why behind things than the results themselves. The family I grew up with, we always lived with the term of strength and honor. And the meaning behind that was always have strength in what you do and purpose, but also always remember where you come from and honor the family name. So anything that I pursued in life, whether it's sport, business, through school, or just generally how I treat people, is always with strength and honor in mind. So I'd say I'm a very honorable person and hopefully a very likable person, which kind of delves in well with the work that I do at the moment. And I guess kind of to kind of piece that together, I would talk the ear off someone about identity and human potential. So hopefully we don't get into that too much because we might be here a while, but I do love being a hype man to anyone that has big ambitious goals.
Nice. It's really clear why you're doing what you're doing. And I feel like it's cool to hear you explain yourself and then know what you do professionally, because so many of us don't have an opportunity to really do like what we're called to or something that aligns so closely to our values and who we are. So you're living it. Awesome. And maybe we need to have you back if you have all these other areas we need to dive into, but we'll mostly stay
Well,
focused on the goal. So you talked a little bit about your journey as an athlete, but can you dive into that in a bit more detail and what that's looked like from maybe a young age to now?
yeah, sure. So I guess going back many years, I was always someone who was sidelined from an academic and a personal side. I was very shy. I had a list. I had learning difficulties from the extent that I was reading a few years behind my age group, which at the time I just thought was kind of like normal. But like looking back on it, it was probably fairly embarrassing, which turned out to be dyslexia whenever they diagnosed me when I was like 7. But I found that because I lacked a lot of confidence, I found like a safe haven in sport because it was something that I was really good at. Even from a young age, I seem to have a nick and a talent for picking up things quickly. So I derive a lot of my value and who I am today from sport. I have a lot of gratitude towards sport and the person that's made me today. I would say, like growing up, I was big into my football, rugby. I ended up going to a private school, which I was very lucky to attend. Didn't actually get in 4 times, but like apparently the headmaster let me in because I tried really hard. But my parents wanted to give me the extracurricular kind of experience because academics wasn't my strong point at that time. And I found myself going into rowing, where like discipline was really, really important, and simply turning up and trying hard was a real good recipe for doing well. So got into that, did really well, worked up the ranks, won some national championships, and then ended up competing internationally, which was really, really, really cool. I loved it. Then uni, I chose because of the rowing, back injury after injury. I ended up going outside of endurance sports and went into powerlifting, rugby, tennis, golf. But what I found through doing golf, tennis, and sports like powerlifting, it never really filled my cup like endurance sports. I think the longer the event, the more the mind comes into play. Because of the hardship that I had when I was younger, I felt that I was always good at overcoming adversity because from probably the age of 3, I was always under an adversity kind of blanket. So I enjoy sports where it's all about mental toughness. And that's led me to do ultra events. So I did Land's End to John O'Groats, which is 1,500 kilometers from Cornwall to the northernmost point of Scotland. I did that in 4 days in awful conditions as well, which was unfortunate, but made it more of an experience. I've done a 25-hour endurance bike race around Windsor Park, and now I do Ironmans for fun. I find that endurance, because of the toughness, is very rewarding. And whether I win or I fail, I still love the game, and I always end up returning for more.
Love that. Thanks for sharing. And I think we'll come on to throughout our discussion today. You just talked about kind of winning or failing, like how you actually frame those. But before we get there, we previewed a little bit kind of what it is that Sheridan Performance, your business, does today. But would you just overview in a little more detail what your professional life looks like?
Sure. So what we do at Sheridan Performance is working with corporate individuals who have busy lives, they're high performing professionals, but they've got ambitions outside of the workplace. Now, whether that's a bucket list, whether that's they've seen someone else do it and they're like, that's sick, I want to do it, but I don't know how to do it, I don't think I can do it. That's the bridge that Sheridan Performance builds. That's what we kind of bring in. So our whole dynamic is almost being like a sit-in TA where we organize someone's calendar to work with their working schedule, their social life, and then also giving them enough fitness that they can achieve the dream that they want.
I think I would have benefited from that a few years ago when I started triathlon, and I was like, wow, how do I fit 3 sports plus strength training into this crazy schedule that I have? It was a real juggle. So sounds like an important value prop there that you have. And I think it's really interesting that you have continued to train and perform at such a high level yourself while you're also busy coaching. So you're kind of living the life that your athletes do to an extent. How do you hold yourself accountable to practicing what you preach? And how does what you're doing on your own then translate into how you're working with your athletes?
Yeah, I think it's almost the peer pressure of if I'm telling all these people who are busy, who are time poor to do this training, then it motivates me to do it because who am I to direct someone in a certain way if I'm not willing to put myself through the so-called fire myself? So I very much live by the philosophy of like I wouldn't give someone else something that I wouldn't be prepared to do myself. And often a lot of the sessions that I do give my athletes, I end up testing it on myself as a little guinea pig, and that works really well. It means I suffer, but also it means when I'm speaking with my athletes, like I can really build rapport with them because I'm like I know exactly how that feels, but this is how I've learned to deal with that, and then I can give them whether it's words of affirmation or tactics on fueling, hydration, or just mindset on how to kind of get through that hard session, which then just builds upon their own belief and also their own fitness to achieve their goal. So honestly, I really enjoy kind of getting in the weeds with the training with them.
Nice. Empathy is a huge thing when you're being coached. I'm speaking from my own experience of people I've liked to work with, whether that's professionally, managers, or in the sports world, when someone can look at me and say, I've done this and it might not translate exactly for you, but let me walk you through my experience makes a huge difference to
Mhm.
me. Having confidence, believing them, and knowing, like, okay, they're not going to tell me this just because the textbook said so.
Yeah, even on like a day like today, it's like 35, 36 degrees. It's also being that coach that can be like, right, it's really hot outside. Like, let's hone the session in. We're not going to do things by the book. You had a really hard day at work, whatever might have happened in your social life. Like, let's tone it down a bit and like actually manage the training around how you're feeling at the time.
Yeah, totally. And making sure that you're holding them accountable to managing their overall stress levels. Because as we know, our bodies don't care if it's work stress or training stress. We talk a lot about that on Mindfuel, and we have to be cognizant of that if we want to perform our best
Yeah,
at all of the things.
anastatic load.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, coming back to the types of athletes that you worked with, you mentioned that a lot of them might be looking for something outside of their professional lives to have a goal for. And I imagine when a lot of them come to you, they might have a specific thing in mind that they want to achieve, whether that's a time, a race distance, maybe getting a qualifying slot into a championship of some kind. But you've also told me previously that you actually don't like to maintain those types of goals with your athletes. You prefer to reframe them. So tell us a bit more about that and why you take the approach that you do.
Yeah, that approach comes from personal experience. Like I said earlier, I really like getting into the detail, and sometimes it's to my own detriment that I'm so focused on the top of the mountain, I forget about all the little bridges that I have to get there. And if the race ends up being the summit, you end up falling off the cliff on the other end. So how I like or me and my brother, who's also part of the business, like to frame it is the race result is a KPI. It's not the goal. You can have a race result that you want, but that's not the goal. And I think that distinction really matters because if the result is the goal, then everything either justifies itself or it doesn't on race day. And that's like a fragile way to train and a fragile way to live. So what I believe instead is that the goal is the person you're becoming through the process. The race is just a date in the diary that forces you to confront yourself, your discipline, your resilience, the capacity to show up when it's inconvenient. And the finish line is the thing that actually tells you something about yourself, but it doesn't always tell you everything, if that makes sense. I know it's a very philosophical way of thinking, but once we kind of delve in and explain it to an individual, they understand it and they really get on board.
Yeah, I'm wondering about that. Like, does much resistance come up, or do they kind of look at you ever and say, okay, but then how do I know if I've achieved this goal? If it's more about who am I becoming?
Yeah, it's a hard one. What we basically ask them to do when they come onto our program, ask them like, what they actually want the race to say about them, not what they want to run or the time they want to do or what position they want to come in or if they want to get a world championship slot. Uh, what is the story that you want this event to tell about yourself? And by asking that open-ended question and letting them speak, not interrupting, letting them speak, that usually opens up some kind of can of worms. And the most common resistance from high achievers is usually that like my whole identity is around hitting like measurable targets, like this isn't a measurable target, yada yada yada. And like it's okay to be uncomfortable having goals which aren't such a KPI. What we often say is go for the memory, go for the experience, enjoy it. And if you do all those things, you will end up getting the KPI that you always wanted. I guess linking it back to work, if you enjoy what you do, you end up working a lot better. You work harder, and then you end up doing better at work. You end up sailing through the ranks and going up the ladder. Whereas if you hate your job from day one, like there's no way you're climbing the ladder. No matter how much money that's involved, it's not sustainable. And even if you do kind of, I guess, go through the motions to get there, like it's just a miserable way to live. So we always frame it in the mindset of, are you enjoying yourself? Do you see the direction you're going in? And is it in a direction of happiness? And if it's not, let's have a conversation and let's find something else that works.
Yeah. Do you have athletes who will say, actually, no, I hate this? And how do you handle that?
No, because we don't neglect the goal of like someone will come to us saying like I want to run a sub 3 marathon or I want to do 90K on the bike on a triathlon in under 3 hours. Like we let them have that, but that's the B goal. The A goal is doing the training, doing it as required, turning up. It's all these like training measurements. And if you tick off all of these training measurements, you will get the goal. But if you always focus on the goal, you end up kind of like a deer in headlights. So we end up focusing on what you have to do in order to achieve that. So it's very much regimented into the program. But what we like to do is we like to kind of try and take all that thinking away from them. We design the sessions and then they end up just becoming the product that they asked us to create for them, which is always nice.
Nice. So maybe just to bring this all together, would you be open to sharing for yourself personally, Jared, this year? You have an Ironman in September. What does that kind of goal layout look like for you? So maybe you have the outcome piece for the race, but what are the B goals or the process goals that lead into that for you?
Yeah, so my B goal, sticking with the phrase, is I want to get as close to 9:30 on my Ironman as possible. That would be a really nice, like, rounded number. I know whether I do a 9:29 or a 9:31 or a 10:30 or whatever, as long as I can look myself in the mirror saying, I had fun that day, I did my best, I did everything I could in training and I finished it. Like, that's what matters to me. Ideally, if I get the time, then that's perfect. But it's not the end of the world. And that opinion comes from the second Ironman I signed up for. I actually DNF'd, and the short story behind that was I did my first Ironman, and right, I was like, second Ironman, I want to do sub 10 hours. I have to do this time. I have to swim like this. I have to do this on the bike. And I was so regimented down to like the minute that when something adverse happened, which in the case of that race was I started cramping after 1500 meters, and then I basically got waterboarded for like 30 minutes after, and then I basically just tapped out. Where in relation, like I could have just held on to the canoe and like sorted myself out for long enough to complete the swim. But I was so in my head that I had to do this, I had to do that, that when those goals fell apart, I fell apart. So I try and not think too much about those targets because it causes myself and many other people to crumble. So they're kind of secondary goals. But the main goal is enjoying myself and having fun. And I find personally that helps me get through the hard times a lot better.
Wow, that's a really powerful example. And I'm sorry that happened, but what a great learning experience.
Honestly, it was probably to my point I made earlier. Like I love the wins, but I also love the failures because I learned so much from the failures. My dad, that whole day, so my brother was doing the same Ironman that day, and my dad made me watch him the whole day, and he just slated me all day, basically saying like why you quit. Wasn't you had a cramp or any of this kind of like you need a hug, like one awful experience. Like it was none of that. It was you had a decision. You could either carried on or you could have, yeah, or you in it. And I chose the latter. And it stung so badly. Without question, it was probably the most embarrassed I've ever been in my life. That like anytime I'm going through hardship, I'm like, I do not want that feeling ever again. So I try and do everything I can to make sure that that feeling never happens. But I feel like that day, that experience, the whole reason for my kind of capitulation was my mental attitude going into it. So I always try and get my athletes to think differently about what success looks like. And finishing or not finishing isn't really success. It's being proud of what you've done. And if something adverse happens, like you dealt with it in the best possible way? And if the answer is yes to that, then you're winning.
Wow. Yeah, that's some really tough love from your dad. But it sounds like it's probably shaped how you coach. And I mean, I think something that you mentioned earlier was that you like to have weekly sessions with your athletes, and those are really good kind of review sessions, recalibration. So, can you tell us a little bit about how that looks? And if you're recalibrating goals, is that done that frequently, or do you kind of space that out? How do you manage that?
Yeah. So the weekly session is like basically the engine room of everything that we do. I mean, like as an example, we have one person who works in private equity. They probably catch about 6 or 7 flights every single month. So like they're in a different country every single week. So if I was to give them a month session in advance, or even if I was to do it weekly, but not to have that weekly catch up where I'm on the phone with them, like there would just be that disparity of like what he can do and what he can't do, what's working at the moment, what's not working at the moment, and then also just building that rapport. Like I said at the start, like it's all about having fun. So if you want to have a bit of banter and it's all regimented of you have to follow this, you have to follow that, then it kind of takes the joy out of the process. So I guess going back to it, like being an amateur athlete, which is most of the people that we work with, a lot of them can't separate their athletic self and their executive self, their partner self, their parent self. So by doing the weekly conversations, we don't just talk about the training, we talk about what's happening in their personal life, what's happening at work, and all that can feed into information which we can diagnose. Okay, this explains why this session was bad, or this is why your HRV is really low, or you went out last night and that's why you only had 4 hours of sleep. But if we don't ask those questions, we won't know. And like, there's some coaches out there that don't ask those questions and they're just like, "Oh, they did really bad today. Well, move on." Or other coaches where they'll text someone, but you never really get the full story over text. So having that weekly conversation, you really get to the crux of what's working in this person and what's not. If you think of it like a car MOT, you don't know what's going wrong under the hood unless you go under the hood. So
Totally. I think we can't help someone else unless we're looking at the human and kind of the overall side as well as the athletic piece. And yeah, I think even us amateurs like to try and compartmentalize those, but it's not possible. It doesn't work. So
Also, just to add to that, because it's fresh in their memory, I can say, okay, what happened in this session? Why was this session so good? Why was this session bad? And like we can kind of depict it like here and there. And I guess from like what your other question about like the goals we tend to visit more on a monthly kind of basis. And a lot of that kind of talk is derived around like, right, what's the race milestones? Are we still pointing at the same North Star? Has life shifted? Does the plan need to shift? I've never believed that rigid programs serve the individual. I think good coaching serves the person. And from working in recruitment, people are interchangeable. Like one day they're good, one day they're bad. So you really need to get on top of the individual and what makes their good days good, what makes their bad days bad, and try and make what's ever happening to make those bad days bad. We try and make them a bit better. And it can be completely non-training related. At the end of the day, we're here to make people like memories, but we're also here to make them happier, healthier individuals. At the end of the day, like getting a PB is great, but it doesn't change the person. We're here to change the person.
love that. Well, not everyone's as lucky to work with a coach like you as your clients. So, to bring things to a close today, if you had to leave us with one final thought about goal setting that might particularly appeal to people who are trying to do this all on their own, what would your advice be?
Write down who you want to be, not what you want to do. Write one paragraph before you build your training plan, before you pick your race, before you even set a finish time target. Write down the person who you're trying to become in this process. This could be in training, this could be in life, this could be in work. And then ask yourself honestly whether the path or the program that you're following serves that version of you that you want to become, or is the path that you're following just filling your calendar. I don't feel like most athletes, most people do this. They go straight to the plan, they go straight to the bells and all the hype, but they haven't actually figured out the foundations, which is basically the whole like what is your reason why for doing it? I think the plan has to be in service of something larger than itself. Otherwise, you're just like logging miles.
I love that. I think I might have some homework for this weekend. I don't know that I've ever actually sat down and articulated that. If people want to work with you or learn more, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
So either on my LinkedIn, which is Jared Sheridan, or go on to our Sheridan Performance page, which is just Sheridan Performance, or our Instagram, which is Sheridan Performance.
Brilliant. That keeps it very simple. And thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. I think there's some really actionable takeaways today. So that's always what we're after. So thank you so much, Jared. We'll make sure that your details get on our website and also in the notes for this show. And as always, if this resonated with you, please do like the episode and subscribe on YouTube or Spotify. And if you have any follow-up comments or questions, drop them below or send us a note at connect@mindfuel.fit. That's all for today. Jared, thanks again to all of you for joining. Thank you and happy and healthy training.
Thank you, Laura.